Okay, good evening, everybody. Sorry about running a little bit late there. I was just dealing with family stuff, as you always do. But anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. Hope everyone is okay. Hope everyone's had a good weekend. I went on a 4-day stag do, and I am far too old for this. So yeah, I am just getting back into the swing of things, as you do, and yeah, desperately trying to sort of remember what it felt like to be human and also eat a vegetable. But anyway, that doesn't change where we are in the market, and it is an interesting time. I'm pretty confused. Um I can someone just confirm that I am actually speaking to you guys? I just want to make sure I have gone live and I've not done something stupid. But while someone is doing that, um, yeah, it has been a bit of an interesting time in the markets, and for me, because thanks, Chris, we're getting to a bit of an interesting stage. I mean, we're at 82, well, nearly 82, 81 and a half thousand dollars, and let me just change the charts whilst we are chatting. But as most of we've had the market sort of get down. We've go down to the low 60s. We potted around in the 60s and 70s region. And then actually over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've just steadily been climbing away. And for me, it's been a bit of a, well, not, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem, but because the moves have been relatively small in between a Tuesday call or a Friday call, and the fact that I stare at the charts all day long, it's been quite difficult for me to justify, a change in my mindset and potentially a move back into the markets. And as we're just looking on Bitcoin in the 3-day time frame here, the overlying thing is we're still within this range. I haven't changed the top and bottom support and resistance lines at the moment. And yes, Bitcoin price keeps on climbing because it just takes a couple more days or a couple more candles to get near that top. And ultimately, I'm looking for a confirmation from breaking out of this range. But whilst I'm waiting for that decision, other areas that I might have been looking at are sort of like ticked off. And you get to the point where, well, actually, not last week. We were down at 75,000. We were retesting the 20 EMA. The conversation was maybe we could re-enter back in, and had we entered back in, we could have got a 10% move back up to where we are at the moment. But for me, RSI at the time was still high. We were still in the northern part of that range, and there was no confirmation of which way it was going to go. I disappeared for 4 or 5 days, and look where the market is. So it is a confusing time. It's a confusing time for me personally in terms of how am I trying to manage my expectations? How am I trying to manage the charts that I'm seeing versus what I believe should be going on? And that's a bit of an internal battle that I'm having at the moment. And I'm trying not to do what I think I always do, or maybe not always do, which is just, convince myself that actually I need to make a move. And that move I play out, it looks good for 2 days. And then the market does exactly what I thought of it. And I think as we go through some of these charts a little bit later on, I'm going to try and explain, one, whilst I do think, we are seeing some good pictures on the chart at the moment, what I need to see for me to actually try and take some action, and then how I'm going to play that if I do go on and take that action. And I think I'll do it maybe not a little bit different, but I as someone who stares at the charts all day long, I think it puts me in a position where I can deal with that. Hello to everyone. Sorry that I was a little late starting there. So looking on the 3-day time frame, just as we are running through, as I've just mentioned, Bitcoin has gone and moved through these channels, and also looking at some key levels. And we talked on Tuesday about sort of that 78,200 level has been at least something for us to consider if we were to break through. And as I mentioned, it actually only broke through that price yesterday, and we've seen it rifle up to the top. But if we take out the trend lines, the white trend lines that we're talking about, given Bitcoin's momentum at the moment, the next logical step that you may want to consider is that 86,000. And, okay, it's only $5,000 away. But in terms of presenting to a move, there is something there that we can have a look at. The other side of this is looking down towards those retests. As I've mentioned, what feels like every single time I've spoken to you for the last 7 weeks, we are at the top side of this trend line. We haven't ever been able to break through it. So unless we find that momentum, the more realistic, well, not realistic, but the more logical idea would be we're going to find that correction and we're going to make a more meaningful move. And I have to use that word meaningful now, down to the lower part of this range. And so as I've just spent the last 3 minutes talking about, it kind of leaves me in a bit of a difficult position personally as to, is now for me the right time to enter? And again, like everybody in crypto, it's your own journey, it's your own understanding. I suppose I ultimately fall back to leaving the market at 94, 91 and 84. Price hasn't lost all of those. The only one I'm not done so well on is the 66 move down there, and I accept that one. But I think I just have to not react now, and I'm going to try and understand or show you why, but then look from a more bullish point of view as to where we're going to go from that. We'll do that on some of the other time frames. Looking at total 2, I mean, this is, it is moving up. So we know that the market generally is moving up. But as again, I said last week, we're not seeing it move as impressive as we have seen it. As we've seen Bitcoin do, or even as we've seen total 2 do, even within this range. So we have not taken out any of the highs, unlike Bitcoin that is making new highs within this range. And in fact, with that $1 trillion level, just almost seems to be like a stable coin, if you will, for total 2 at the moment. And this is kind of actually reflected in Bitcoin dominance, again, on the 3-day time frame. We're now at 61.3%. So that range that we talked about for months of 60% to 57%, we've cleared that quite clearly. And actually, barring this ridiculous spike that didn't happen with Bitcoin's all-time high. No, it happened the day or a few days later on Friday the 10th of October, for those of you that are around, where Bitcoin fell, from 120 down to 102,000. We saw all of the altcoins absolutely collapse. And for the briefest of seconds, Bitcoin dominance absolutely flew. But we take that one out, and we're pretty much rivaling end of October highs. And then prior to that is sort of in and around August. So we are beyond where Bitcoin was from a dominance point of view, even at its all-time high. Just showing how strong Bitcoin is at the moment. And again, my argument probably being that the other side of it isn't necessarily in altcoins at the moment, it's probably in stables, or a better proportion of that is within stables. And the stable dominance, although it is down, as you would expect with Bitcoin climbing, we're not seeing it anywhere near the levels we did back in October and November of last year. So probably still a lot of people like me sat on the sidelines, just, I don't know if we're in a hope and a prayer kind of point of view at the moment, but certainly stuttering about whether or not we're getting back into the market. And I'm going to kind of do something which we don't normally talk about, but we will just talk about it for the briefest of moments, because when I mentioned at the beginning about this sort of confusing kind of picture that we've got, I think we kind of need to take in the whole of the financial picture. Let's just change this now. We're looking at the NASDAQ. I mean, we're at 28,000, okay? Not that long ago, we were at 22,000, just solid green candle after green candle. The thing doesn't seem to want to stop. Same with the S&P. And yet at the same time, oil's still relatively high. The Dixie is making a bit of a recovery. Gold is potentially finding a bottom and rising up. And there's a few things that we would normally see either playing one side or the other are actually either moving in tandem or just doing the complete opposite of what we'd expect, particularly given some of the geopolitical situations that we have. Obviously, tensions in Iran over the last 48 hours seem to be ramping up. I've not really been following it. I know Bijan, and I'm sure Habib will know far more than I do, but at least there's alleged conversations of, nations and ships being struck again by Iran. So how that's going to unravel, we'll have to wait and see. We've got inflation on the rise. We've got this, and I do think this is a bit of a a bomb waiting to go off, excuse the term. But potentially this jet fuel shortage just leading up into the summer holidays, already millions of seats getting cancelled. The UK government has kind of changed the law over the last couple of days to kind of favour the airlines in being able to cancel trips at short notice, which I think has kind of gone a little bit under the radar. But, rightly so, jet operators are just saying, look, we either need to put prices up or we're going to have to just cancel flights and maybe a little bit of both. And I think, things like inflation hitting sort of countries, things like oil, it doesn't necessarily happen immediately, but it certainly could happen, months down the line. And that's a key indicator in a very, very vital time, which is going to have a huge impact on tourism and everything else that goes with it. And whilst you're thinking, Harry, why on earth are we talking about that when it's supposed to be talking about crypto? I think you just get a picture of just how confusing everything seems to be, because on one hand, we've got political unrest. I mean, we've got assassination attempts as well. UK is about to go to the polls on Thursday for local elections, obviously, but that's going to have a bit of well, if the polls are correct, some significant ramifications. And yet at the same time, in the same breath, we're just talking about investors being absolutely happy to just continue to invest in the market, to see no opportunity to maybe just take the brakes off a little bit. And it's more almost the fact that actually what we're seeing is that as long as earnings come out positive, and remember earnings are 3 months prior, and we can at least put some sort of logic towards sort of future quarterly returns, then we're just going to continue to do it. And to me, it does kind of feel like, are we just lemmings at the moment, just plowing forward as happy as we can be towards a cliff that we just don't really care that is in front of us? So there's definitely an element of caution. And if something could summarize that better than anything else, in my opinion, when we talk about long-term bonds, gilts, whatever you want to call them, yields, interests, etc. And a couple of the big ones, and I'm going to use the British ones, but the Americans are just the same as well. But when you look at the British 10-year or 30 years on your screen at the moment, we're at 5.74%. Okay, now what does that really mean? It means that people who want to, lock up for long periods of time are demanding to be paid significantly more than previously. And that's done because they just see genuine concern or risk within the markets. So they want to be compensated for that. Now, whether those risks be just national debt, inflation, general uncertainty, whatever, that's going up. But when you get above that 5%, I mean, we're talking about levels not seen for a very long time. And I know this one here is pipping up. We are above where we were back in September 2025. But, after that, it's nothing there. I'm already in 2016. You can see nothing in the same region on the bonds side of things. So the market seems to be, certainly from the bond market, seems to be suggesting we're heading towards massive uncertainty, massive risk, massive concern, need to pay us a lot of money for it. And yet, with everything else, sorry, let's just open up that screen there, we're just cracking on as normal. As I mentioned, the UK 10-year is also above 5%. And again, today didn't quite beat where it was a couple of months ago. So these are 3-day candles. But you kind of get the picture of how high it is with a very similar sort of look back. And again, nothing till 2008, 2009. And I don't think we all need to be history buffs to understand what went on in and around there. And again, the US, it actually was earlier on today above 5%, but it has dropped below. But it's at 4.98. So pretty much at that level, that 5% level where concern is generally started to raise. So I think it's not very attractive to look at, but it's certainly a telltale sign that there's that level of uncertainty. God, I hope I haven't bored you all to death with that whilst we've been chatting. But for me, it just helps to, well, it doesn't help to clear that picture, but I suppose it just gives me that alternative view of like, why am I sticking with this? And how are we sort of risking this, sort of judging this risk, assessing, evaluating this risk going forward? Now, trust me, ever since 2022, people have been calling for that recession. It hasn't happened yet. And, bond markets at these levels doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to lose the floor of the traditional markets tomorrow. Of course not. There will be warning signs, But just like that old theoretical chemistry experiment of you put a fog in boiling water, it's going to jump straight back out. You put that same fog in cold water and warm it up, it's just going to stay in there and boil to death. Maybe we're starting to get some telltale signs that this is actually an area of concern. So something to certainly consider. And if you can believe it, we've not even moved off this yet. We're now got to talk about BitTensor, because on the 3-day time frame here, it's not done what Bitcoin has done yet. Actually, it's had a relatively good week, moving from those sort of 250 lows, now sort of messing in and around that 290 level. But I think the most prominent thing from it is we've actually got back above this yellow line. And if we can stick the landing with this candle, maybe building a little bit of support in and around that 280 level, you're going to see when I get onto the daily time frames that a lot of the wicks to the top side, when I get my pen out here, you guessed it, it's going to be the Gandalf line that's holding us back. But we can't have that squeeze at the moment. So maybe there's an opportunity for a little bit of a run for BitTensor to build up through. You obviously know that if we can get past that 300 level, I'm really needing to see us. I mean, I'd used to say 375. I suppose I will settle for 350 as the first battle to try and get through these repeated lower lows and lower highs. Anyhow, so that's kind of where we are on that big term picture. We go down to our charts. Excuse me. I'm definitely coming down with a chest infection from the stag do, which is obviously what you need when you're going to go and run a half marathon on Sunday as well. But we are where we are with that. Bitcoin 12-hour time frame, just trying to have a look at things from a bit of a different angle here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, trying to have that conversation about, okay, if Bitcoin is going to at least ride this wave up for a little bit longer, where can I, and potentially you, I suppose, look to see about making some safe re-entries that aren't going to immediately roll over us, and what could that ultimately mean? And just looking on the 12-hour time frame, and what I've had to do is zoom out a little bit here, because we've got to, as I say, above 80,000, a level we've not actually been since January. So we don't have that much data in and around these levels of sort of liquidation levels, certainly built up over the last 3 months. So I had to zoom out to the 6-month chart. And really the biggest block on the 6-month chart is actually now up at 85 to 86,000. Which has sort of stemmed from us effectively losing that 85,000 or 86,000 level back when we were in our previous range. Oops, I've gone and moved everything else now, which you can kind of see if I were to have extended that on, that's how that has formed there. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some levels here. There is actually a very small block building at around about 83 to 82,000. It's only been building over the last 3 days since we kind of cleared the 80,000 level and sort of closed out this grey one here. But if we now move away from liquidation levels, we just have a look at the EMAs, which is the orange and the blue line, and it's actually looking very nice. Honestly, it really is. We've got a clear double bottom here, which is also the right-hand side of a much bigger double bottom. But since we've had that double bottom off this low down here at the beginning of April, we've just very nicely, very sort of just methodically worked our way up the 20 EMA on the 12-hour time frame. Just continue to make these higher highs and higher lows. And even when we have lost it, and we've only lost it once, beautifully picked up, I mean, almost to the dollar off the 20 EMA. Sorry, the 50 EMA will be for the 12-hour time frame. And then continued the strength in that move back up. And right now, there's no reason to bet against it. We can just continue to see that flow. And the more logical way of having a look at how this may pan out is assuming that these fib levels still hold and they have worked for us in the past. You know, I've said that, is maybe that continuation towards that 82,000 level. And then probably, although this is quite a steep line, some sort of retest at that stage back down to here. It won't fall back far, maybe around about 80,000 before we then go again and have another attempt at that 82.5 level. And if we can break that, then we're going to be looking at this $85,000 level. Please remember that number. It's going to be important to us in a moment. But ultimately, a nice, patient, methodical climb up. And again, that kind of adds to the difficulty personally that I have felt in trying to find that level to say, you know what, not even necessarily that that I was wrong. The bottom is in. Valhalla, here we come. But actually, no. Let's try and take advantage of a potential counter trend rally and move back in. And I suppose the only saving grace that I can sort of sit back on at the moment is not 100% exiting. And I think that's a sort of a valuable lesson for anybody, really, no matter what you're seeing. Always keep some skin in the game. And we've still got about 25% of our portfolio at least still going. So we've got that. I think it's actually about 20% to be fair. Got that still to play with. Lost my train of thought on what I was going to say when I was talking about that. Not too sure. So we will continue through. Now, again, what I will say is I'm not really interested until Bitcoin's price now breaks wherever this 20 EMA is on the 12-hour time frame. And if I'm being brutally honest, the 50 EMA, because it's just proven to be so strong. And yeah, it's very simplistic as a way to have a look at it, but the reality of it is it has been such a strong benchmark for any retracements back. So even if we were to see some sort of rejection today, maybe it just gets down to the 50 EMA, which even right now is at 77,000, still significantly higher than the low. And it's not until we lose that I'm going to get really, whether concerned or excited, depends on where we are within the market. I personally am in the market, as to how we act through that one. And we can actually kind of see that the market is reflecting with this fear and greed index back at 50 now, neutral territory. Yesterday was 40, so a big jump today. No surprise there. We have seen there is still a little bit of volatility. I mean, we were down as low as 26 only a few days ago, but we are making that climb. Sorry, now you might be able to see it a little bit better. Back out of it. I'm on the 1 year here, and as you can see, except for that move up to 98,000 back in January, we are moving in a very sort of fresh air territory. After months of being down in the extreme fear, the market is moving on. And as I mentioned countless times before, we forget the pain so fast, so quickly, and that's what we're doing. It's how high we can climb through this. And I'm not saying that every chart can be or should be plotted, but maybe we just need to have a look. I'll tell you what, it's one of the best freehand lines I think I've ever drawn as to what is going to happen. Now, I do think obviously we'll break through 50 today. Tomorrow will be higher than 50 just because we have climbed another couple of percent. But, this is a good level to suggest that maybe we might start to see some sort of reaction from there. However, this is going to be, in my opinion, very news related or driven. So from an ETF point of view, we have, and we've had a couple of sell days and maybe what you'd class a couple of neutral days with 22 million nothing and 20 million being purchased by BlackRock. But still, of the 15 days you can count there, 13 of them have been from BlackRock and 12 from absolutely everybody when you put it all together. So still looking like the investors, the institutional money, still interested in getting there. And the last 2 days, Friday and yesterday for America, when the markets were open, $600 million worth. Definitely a lot of interest around that there. So again, still looking very positive in my opinion. I don't know what I was doing with this one. We should have been on that chart. Then we get onto Bitcoin from a weekly time frame, and I'm trying to think how to phrase this because one we're not on the weekly time frame. There we go, from the weekly time frame. Because I'm going to have a look at some of the. I'll tell you what, we'll just talk and then I'll come back to one-on-one talk about afterwards. But weekly time frame, Bitcoin's point of view, when you start to zoom out, and maybe we should start with this, but again, nothing I've not told you before. That W formation is there. We've got through the neckline, looks very strong, and this is it. We've broken through that 20 EMA, and so far, okay, the candle's only a day and a half old, but we have broken through it. We broke through it actually 2 weeks ago. Last week, although there was a wobble, we did finish above it, and now we're looking for that strong move from it. So that's absolutely fine. Where could we get to? The 50 EMA. What is the 50 EMA at currently at the moment? 86,000 to 85,000. And as I mentioned, to remember that number, 86,000 to 85,000. Certainly, maybe not the word poetry, but some sort of magnet, if you will, that's leading towards that. And obviously, when you build that on it, not only do you have the support that was built from there, you also have the resistance level that was built from this time last year as well, just sort of acting as a potential magnet towards all of that. And I just think that from a higher time frame point of view, if we can get through that 82 level, I suppose that's certainly the level to go. And then we have to have that conversation, if we can get through the 50 EMA, of right, well, what is our main indicator for bull and bear markets? It's the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame. Well, actually, this is suddenly back in the conversation. February, when we were down at 60% and the EMA was at 98, not a conversation to be had. Now, 8-9 weeks later, we're a lot closer to that conversation, and I think it is worth monitoring. Obviously, I'm not going to react off the first wick that gets through the 50 EMA, but you can kind of get a feel for maybe that is the level I absolutely have to swallow my pride and go through on that. So that's certainly where I would be looking. I mean, what I would say, and it is a bit messy, how am I going to do this? It's not going to do anything now, is we have effectively had, I mean, I know this was red, but it was a very nice low test on the red candle there. So we've had 6 green candles in a row without any sort of major pullback. I think really then the conversation is, what are we doing in and around that sort of 78,400 level, which again could tie in with price action here, and then the base of where things were back from this time last year. Maybe we need to have some sort of retest in and around there, if not falling below it. But before I get too carried away, before I sort of throw the towel in, I suppose, I kind of just have to have that, well, where are we on the grand scheme of things? Because yes, Bitcoin has made a 20% move up, but we are still significantly down from the all-time high. We are still, below the previous ranging period from where we were. And we're just at the moment potentially experiencing a counter trend rally, which in bear market years are not unusual to have. We go back to them all. Every single bear market rally we've been in has had counter trade rallies. Yep. We've had counter trend rallies. It's back to the, so this is 2022, back to the 50 and to the EMA, back to the 20. Even on our breakthrough, we've had that sort of move to the 50 EMA before a rejection. Similarly, whether you want to count 2019 as a mini bear market, these sort of trends up to the 20 and the 50 EMA, counter trend rallies before a retest. And then for any of you that were around that 2018 bear market, many a time did we have this sort of counter trend rally up to this before coming back and retesting, and ultimately having this sort of move back down. And I suppose for me, that's sort of, I'm not saying it's necessarily a sort of saving grace or I'm just going to be stubborn, but I have been in these periods before where we have experienced these counter trend rallies, and had I have known this was going to be it, obviously getting in whilst we were talking about stuff down here would be fine. The fact that we've had such a sustained counter trend rally in a down market with potentially some of the headwinds that I've mentioned from a political or financial point of view, in a way, my risk appetite's not necessarily there in terms of the risk reward of leaping in. Now, that doesn't mean that it might not be for you, and that's absolutely fine. But I need something else to tell me to do it, because getting in now and moving everything now for a $5,000 potential move before I actually need a real confirmation, it's just probably not worth it where it should have been had we had that conversation correctly, and hindsight being 2020 and all that, at 65,000. So I just think yes, nothing happens exactly the same. No 4-year cycle is going to be 100% the same, despite what everyone wants it to be when they, draw. And I'm just as guilty of this as well. I try and remind myself that I'm just sort of, calling upon similarities just to sort of show patterns, if not the exact same thing needing to play out. But the fact of the matter is, even if we didn't talk about the 2014, but the 2014 has these occasions of these rallies up to the 50 EMA before finding new lows later on. And so I just think, why would this be any different? Why should this be any different? And does that mean that we have to change our view? And if you got out, well, no one got out here, let's face it. But if you got out somewhere after we peaked under the assumption that the 4-year cycle was coming, then what has really changed that theory? Nothing has broken from that yet. We haven't found a higher high. We've still not found a higher high on a significant time frame, whether you want the daily or the weekly. So until we get to those kind of levels and those kind of conversations, unfortunately, it's a bit of the status quo. And this is where sometimes just being out of the market can be quite difficult. Managing those levels of emotion, certainly for me, I've just said, last couple of days been kind of difficult, because there have been times where I've thought, okay, we've checked off that one. Oh, but there's something else just 1,000 ahead. Oh, now we've checked off that one, but it doesn't quite get through that main level. So I'm just having that little, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a wobble as such, but the questions are definitely there. And I'm just at the moment reminding myself, I don't feel the risk to reward is right, and I haven't seen anything major break from that. And as I've mentioned, most bear markets see these counter trend rallies, and actually what typically then happens is we see some sort of correction, whether it be narrative driven or just lack of volume driven or just market maker manipulation driven, whatever, the not only comes back, comes back to sort of like the previous base, but generally takes out the low. And as I said, what we normally see actually is some sort of move, and then whenever it happens, we have another move back down. That's the one that catches people, and then we start that build out from it. So that's where I'm still going. And look, whether or not I'm going to be right with that, time will tell. I won't be stubborn. I promise you, when we get closer to that 94 level, I'll be back in. But until now, I'm just going to be sitting nervously, I suppose, on my hands. And not, as I say, not quite praying that I'm right, but certainly questioning whether I'm right. And again, the other thing, yes, we have seen that strength with Bitcoin over the last sort of 6-7 weeks. But it's not a new all-time highs like we're seeing here. So, and I'm going to show you the NASDAQ on with the RSI and a few other things in a moment. But with the traditional markets, NASDAQ, S&P, Russell 2K, whatever, we're talking about all-time high territories, not just local highs, not just recent highs, all-time highs. And so this is in uncharted territories, and this is looking, from a weekly point of view, ignore any geopolitical conversation, any fundamental, strong. Low back in 2022. Since that 2022, yeah, we've busted out. We've come back and we've retested on the 50 EMA. We've done the same. Sometimes we lose it a little bit. People get a bit nervous, but then we've climbed back. We just came back down. Another instance slightly below the 50 EMA, but only for a week. And then we've moved back up. So this has worked very well in a prolonged bull market, while Bitcoin, it's still technically in a downtrend, although we are seeing that slight uptrend at the moment. So there's that to consider. And I'll stick with NASDAQ for now, because I think it's worth talking about. Let's stick to some of these. Certainly get rid of that one. So we're kind of back onto the daily. We're kind of getting towards the end, I suppose, with where things are. But I just want to kind of draw our attention to a few things that we should at least be considering. Let's start with the weekly time frame from the NASDAQ. So we've already mentioned that we are at least seeing some significant strength from that. But I do want to draw your attention maybe to the RSI, because we're not there yet, but we're right on the cusp. We're 69.2, or sorry, 82. So we're not at 70 and higher. But generally, on weekly timeframes here, when we get above here, we can stay for a couple of months. Don't get me wrong. We've done that in 2023, 2024, little bit in 2025, although not much. But after we get in there, we do then see these corrections come through. And unfortunately, whilst Bitcoin may not be following with the same amount of strength of the Nasdaq and the S&P on the way up, and people may say that the correlation is over, when these do correct, unfortunately, the rest of the world of risk on assets correct too, and Bitcoin finds that fall. So, what is this telling me? It's not telling me that the top is in by any means on the Nasdaq, but it's also sort of, I suppose, maybe confusing me, but kind of suggesting maybe we're getting a little bit too overbought, a little bit too warm a temperature right now to want to start to make that move in. I think I've been fairly honest with this. I've not sold any of the pension pot yet, so we've been able to ride some of that gains up. But ultimately, this is just helping. I don't know if it is helping actually, but this is certainly at least adding to the discussion about is now the right time to move back into Bitcoin. And we're going to see on Bitcoin's time frames as well. It's looking fairly overbought too. And I think I have to say this every time I'm legally contracted to, that the RSI is not correlated to price. So if the RSI moves down by 10%, doesn't mean the price is going to move down by 10%, and also vice versa. But then by that same means, we have to talk about the bearish divergence. So, as I say, you're legally obligated to. You can't not point these out, otherwise you're not allowed to have them on your trading view charts. So there's certainly some things to consider there. And I just think, given it's the weekly time frame and we still managed to get into overbought, the previous times we've done that, we've seen these corrections. And that previous correction went from 26 down to 22. The other ones, I suppose, ultimately peaked here, didn't it? 24. So that would have been at 21,000 before going down to 16 at its base down here. Obviously, we had the bit of a move up there. But you get the point that when we get into these overbought territories, the market does usually correct at least down to the 50 EMA. And I know there's an argument to say that we've already been to that. It doesn't mean that we can't revisit it. So yeah, let me get rid of some of these now. Shrink that back down. I think the daily's pretty much a similar kind of story. I now have to move it back up just so you can see it. We are in overbought. Matter of fact, we're nearly at 80 now. It's the highest we've been since 22nd of May in 2024. Just price was seeing, as I mentioned, that correction. But even on the RSI, you can just see how quickly we have moved from oversold to overbought. So it's been quite a fierce kind of frenzied maybe move out of there. And we've still managed to stay above it. But as I mentioned, we can stay in here for a while, but once we come back down, it's when you've got to keep your eyes open. And so that's just where I kind of see that. Right, let's get on to the ones that we're really here to talk about. So here we are with Bitcoin. And so what am I seeing? What is it that has been kind of holding me back, or that I'm trying to get some sort of understanding from? Well, obviously we got the range, and as I've been talking, we've actually managed to stick our head above the parapet, something that we have done in the past. So we always look for the bodies of the closures. We've also then talked about, well, what's the 800 EMA doing? Well, yesterday, we went straight up to it at 80,600, rejected. Today we've broken through it. So, okay, that's one of these ones that we've ticked off. The annoying thing is we have been ranging for so long that the 200 EMA now comes into question. The 200 EMA, kind of a useful, spit your words out, Harry, sort of kind of indication. And at the moment, you can't deny that the 800, the trend line, and the 200 EMA are just so close together. They're almost like one super point. That what would you do, if you were an autonomous, emotionless being that just knew, or believed, should I say, that things like EMAs and that have sort of strong kind of magnetism, but also strength within them themselves? Is now the right time to bet on the market long? No, you might as well just wait that $1,000 extra, wait for that confirmation to get through. And so again, that $82,000 level, going back to this chart here with where this Fibonacci level is, 82,500, tying in at the moment with the 200 EMA, for me, we might as now wait. And yet someone might just say, Harry, you could come up with continuous things to wait to get you there. And I accept that I can. And then maybe that's a little bit of a curse of staring at the charts 15 hours a day, every day of the week. I will do that. But right now, the $400 difference between getting in now or waiting, obviously it's not going to be $400, doesn't seem to play right with me. And again, we talked about the RSI with the NASDAQ and a few others, but daily time frame RSI still high. Okay. We're not in overbought territory yet, but we're getting close to it. The last time we were at this level, you know, we had that correction. The last time we got there was our last flirt with the 200 EMA. Didn't quite get to it, but it was the last flirt with the top of this range from January of 2026 before we had that move back down. And so, you know, they rhyme. They may not look exact, but there's just some similarities there, and I'll just stand by that one. I'm afraid, and I must have said this 4 or 5 times. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm going to wait to see how it plays out. Now, like I say, we get through that level, and I mentioned this earlier. We've got vectors to now attack to get back into that range, sort of 86,000. I think there's a lot of attractive things from the daily time frame that can help us to move that up. I also think every man and his dog is talking about this range down here, and if they've got anything, they'll be like, oh, well, we'll stick an EMA on, and they'll have a look at the 200 EMA. Might not look at the 800, but certainly look at the 200. And so getting above those, I think, is also just going to bring some bullish momentum up there. Whether or not you want to buy into their market makers being able to manipulate that and pull the price back down, we'll ultimately wait and see. Where do we go to the downside if we have a downside? We've talked a lot about the upside. As I mentioned, these EMAs, 77 down to the 20 EMA daily time frame. Why not have a look at that? Even the 50 EMA, 75,000. It's not that far away. So could quite conceivably get back down to that level and still remain bullish. And it's going to only be a retracement back to about the midway point of that range. It will give us a nice refresh of the RSI, even if it only goes down, 10 points. Still going to get us back into a level where it could then have some breathing room to go back north. So yeah, so there's kind of, the points I'd be looking at. I mean, ultimately, yesterday's one as well, I suppose we should throw in there, which is a 10 EMA at 78,500. But 78,500, 77,000, 75,000, they're the levels to look at if we reject from the couple of areas that we're looking at right now. If the 4 hours are going to tell us anything different, really. RSI still looking hot, still at the top of that range. Doesn't look like it's particularly running out of strength. We did post a blue vector candle, but there's nothing out of the ordinary within its formation. We've come back. We've conceivably retested back at the 50 EMA. We've even now been able to climb above the 800 EMA. We haven't bothered to retest it for the support because you know what? We found plenty of support for it over the weekend. And if any of you want to understand why price didn't do anything over the weekend, it's because it had the 800 EMA as its support for once instead of its resistance. So, no, I think the 4 hour, just again, not looking too bad. And without anything really standing its way here, you can now see that clean air if we can stick this back up to that 86,000 level. Tying in on the levels on the way back down, 50 EMA and the 800 EMAs at that 78, the 200 EMAs at the 75 we talked about. So there's some similarities there. Moving on to BitTensor daily time frame. And I said we'd talk about it, but yes, we had that nice move over the weekend, and it was very appreciative. Green vector candle, daily time frame through the 50 EMA. Okay, held back at initially the 200 EMA, but found the strength the next day to move on through. But 3 days in a row, we've actually ran into the Gandalf line, which has kind of pushed us back. But to be fair, we've kind of ranged over these last 3 days, somewhere between sort of 290 and around about 280. So I don't think that's necessarily too bad. I'm absolutely ruling out, even if it were to happen, it's definitely no head and shoulders here. This is too big a gap compared to the left shoulder for that to be even considered as a head and shoulder. We'd have to be looking for a new pattern from within that. Now, what we still can see from here is, even if we do get through the Gandalf line, 296 as it is at the moment, for me, it's still big moves are needed. 335, I suppose, 345 from a close point of view, but even sort of 380 is where we need to be getting. So still like another $100, almost another 33% from where price action is. It can do it. We know BitTensor can go on those runs, but it's got to do that before we can change that narrative of actually forming a higher high within this. And even then, we probably need another high and high just to sort of help cement that. But the RSI is looking fine on the daily timeframes, just in the middle of it. Could conceivably go one or two ways from that. I think I must have deleted it, but we did have some sort of trend line here, which we were looking at, which it's had that nice bounce from. So well done to it for breaking up from that one. But as I say, plenty of room before it gets too overbought. So nothing really of concern there. And yeah, we've got vectors, we've got support lines, but ultimately looking fairly, well, not nice, because I've just explained it's got that work to do. But over the last few days, at least, that strength hasn't diminished. It hasn't immediately fallen through. I suppose the levels we need to really be concerned of, again, they're so close to each other. Let's just say, as long as we can stay above 265 and that 50 EMA, not retrace all the way back to where we were, and I think we can take that one as a good sign. 4-hour time frame, again, that sort of ranging pattern there that we had for so long, which I suppose at least allowed the EMAs to kind of become a bit of a flat line. But again, we get into this sort of territory where, okay, we had this false move from the 50 EMA, came back down, but just found the 50 EMA again, retested. And the two that are holding us back from that previous hump of the 200 and the 800, we used a few increased candle volumes with green vector candles. We've broken through, and now that 20 EMAs 4-hour time frame, so maybe it's not the best to hold. But even the 50 EMA down at sort of 270, let's just call it, there's going to be some sort of resemblance there. And I'm just wondering, maybe not. So I was just wondering if there's any sort of previous price history. There's a little bit of a movement back at the middle of April, but nothing huge over recent histories. Unfortunately, with such a level of ranging, it's that 250 level, which is sort of the main floor for where we're looking, whether or not we want to maybe just clone this and put some sort of like range in there. But a retest even down to 260, this 800 EMA, it's not going to necessarily be the end of the world, as long as we can then build from that one going through. Anything else really to have a look at? So, let's just go on the daily. I've not really looked at these, but interestingly, first I go on BNB, they're just in alphabetical order. Actually not got through the 50 EMA as of yet. Doge, okay, Doge is making that nice move. What's it got in its way? It's kind of looking quite similar to Bitcoin. Let me just get a line. I don't know how many people are in some of these. They're on my chart because of Astrid Arena. These are some of the assets that you trade. But there's Doge. Ethereum. So again, not looking as great as what Bitcoin has done itself. But there's two things from that. One, it's attacking the sort of like upper part of this resistance level. So having that go. Two, the RSI is nowhere near as hot as what Bitcoin's was. And we've still got some room to be able to move, although, if you compare it to the level that we ranged at, or the base of the last range, still $500 away. I don't know what that is. Let's just have a quick look in terms of relative percentage move. So that's a 20% move, whereas a similar thing for Bitcoin to do from its current price is only a 9% move. So still a bit of work needed there with Ethereum, but it's at least above its 50 EMA, which some of these aren't. Hype doing well. This is one that I think I mentioned a while back. Well, not a while back, but a few weeks back. I actually would be interested in this over the next cycle. I think it's got some utility, and I can see a lot of similarities with BNB. So again, showing some strength, and even just generally over the last 3 months when Bitcoin's been down and ranging. This one's been moving up. Very nice from that point of view. Kaz, okay, today got it above the 50 EMA, but still pretty much within its corridor. Need to see that build a little bit more over the next couple of candles. Links moving up. Good to see. Okay, fine. Some of these are actually breaking out their 50 EMAs. Near hasn't quite managed it yet. Pippin, I think we're borderline dead this thing now. But we'll still monitor it for the time being. SBX, also I don't think many have. Sol hasn't got past it. It's a bit like BNB then, and we're talking about some big players here. So not made that move. That conversation about Bitcoin dominance really starting to make a bit more sense here. And I suppose it's a sort of maybe not lack of trust is the right term, but lack of confidence. Yeah, to just have that more seismic move into some of these altcoins. But if we can sustain that fear and greed above that neutrality of 50%, I think you will see people start to move those through. Okay, Monero's moving. Silver we're not fussed about. XRP. So the big ones, BNB, XRP, and Sol, none of them have managed to get through the 50 EMA yet, which is interesting to see. Zcash has had some nice moves over the last week or so, up, $125 in that time. And again, since it's bottomed, this could be one to watch out for trading, actually. It worked very well beforehand. I think I need to start watching this one a little bit more on that. Anything else really to go through and have a look? Circle, I didn't bother talking about it today, but they had a bit of a jump in their price. And then today, so that was yesterday, and then today I saw they announced not only job layoffs, but a sort of a more of a heavier leaning on AI. I didn't bother reading the whole news article. So I don't know, I can't believe it's going to be a shift towards AI, but maybe just replacing some of the workforce with AI. So I'm not sure if that's what was behind the green candle or what we're seeing behind the pullback from it. But it did have a nice move from that. A lot of the other ones are ever so slightly down, but we've seen some strong moves up, over the last week or two. And again, Nvidia got to overbought and then it started to move back down and cool off. It's almost like these things, as simplistic as some people like to ridicule them are, they do kind of just give you a direction. You can't trade off them, obviously, but Palantir's falling again. Tesla had a bit of a recovery from that low it had at the beginning of the month. Coinbase, sorry, that was Circle. I'm being thick here. I thought I was talking about Coinbase in this one. I wasn't. I was talking about Circle. This one is Coinbase. And so we had that move up initially, and then it's pulled back after the announcement. Sorry, wrong ones there. I'm going to blame that on the 4-day hangover. Microsoft is there. MicroStrategy, or Strategy as it is now, had a nice strong move from the lows, coming into its first real interesting bit of sort of headway, I suppose, as not only are we about to, on the dailies, to be fair, we have closed above these, but we haven't really taken out this range of 200 from that drop down, and then we got the 800 and the 200 EMA. It's interesting to see how those do. And then Astrid, I don't know if Simon's been talking about this that much, but obviously it has been falling down. From as I understand it, IG are going to stop, or not just Astrid, but all Aquis related stocks, stop selling it there, which obviously has put a bit of nervousness. I think you can still sell it until the 20th of June. If you're invested in this, please check it out, or you probably already know. You can still get it at Hargreaves Lansdown and a few others, so it's not like it's a dead asset or anything. And then on top of that, I think they have a repeated seller from previous board members that are just selling, but it is moving down. If it's something you're interested in, today it got down to sort of the lows that we saw back in December. Yes, this looks like it's the lows completely, but remember, this is an incomplete chart. I'm not saying that the falling is going to stop here, but certainly something to have a look at there. And I think other than that, that's probably where we are with things. And going back to this chart, just once we finish, definitely some interesting movement for Bitcoin. If any of you managed to catch hold of it, well done for doing that. However confusing it may be for me at the moment, it's not enough for me to knee-jerk reaction back into it. I think that's the gist for me. There's a few more ticks on this chart here, which I will see, which again is not enough for me to say it's over, we're back to bull market, but it might just give me the impetus to try and trade a little bit of it, and try and sort of recover some of that. And if we're going to be wrong, I suppose the best way to be wrong is to be in the market at the same time. And so maybe that's just something I need to ultimately consider there. And yeah, we'll just see how the rest of it ultimately plays out. Tomorrow, we're going to try another one of those open mic nights. Last week, we talked quite a lot about AI bots, which is absolutely fine. And maybe that's what we end up doing again. We'll have a look. I'll send a link out for that later. Trading Pub is going to be on Thursday. We'll do another charting one on Friday. And it's not too far away till the cuddle. I actually don't think I can make it. I do need to get back to Simon and let him know on that one. But we'll see where it is. Hopefully that hasn't paused. No, it hasn't. But other than that, do please enjoy the rest of your weeks, weekends, days, wherever you sit with all of those. While I try and put this hangover to bed. And obviously, if I do anything prior to Friday, I will let you all know in Discord if you have any questions. As I always say, feel free to tag me, DM me, whatever it may be. I try and get back as quick as I can to some of those. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. And I'll speak to you all soon. Cheers now.